Now, I don't know about you, but cast your mind back over history, the history of our world. What would you say was the darkest day in history? I guess you've all got some in relatively recent history. You might think of Hiroshima or something dreadful. What was the darkest day in human history? Well, I think you'd struggle to find a darker day than that Sabbath day, when the light of the world, Jesus Christ, lay still and dead, encased in the darkness. Behind that giant stone, sealed in. And the powers of darkness were determined to keep it so. The stone must be sealed. The guards must be in position. But for the disciples, what impenetrable darkness they endured. They had believed that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. They believed that he was the one that Israel and the world had waited centuries for. And now he was dead. Their own people, his own people, had delivered him to the Gentiles for that merciless beating and that cruel, barbaric execution. And worse, for the disciples, they kind of knew that, well, they had deserted him. Maybe they should have done more to defend him. They had hoped, after all, that he was the one who would redeem Israel. They believed that he had the words of eternal life. But now all their hopes of eternal life were dashed. Gone. Had they been deceived? They were distraught, they were broken, they were a weeping group of people, and some wept uncontrollably. Their brains were numb with grief, and their souls were in dark despair, and their faith was tottering on the brink of collapse. And when the first glimmer of light began to appear on the eastern horizon, when the buildings of Jerusalem began to emerge as silhouettes against that light, the ladies made their way to the tomb. They made their way to pay their final respects that they had been unable to pay in the mayhem of that Friday afternoon. And when they arrived in the garden, they were greeted by an angel. An angel who made a striking announcement. "Fear not ye, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which was crucified. He is not here. He is risen as he said." Now that is some announcement. But not just an announcement, an invitation. Come, see the place where the Lord lay. And it's that invitation that I hope bounces down the ages to us in Treharris. Come, says the angel, see the place where the Lord lay. come. What does come mean? It means you can't stay where you are, over there. Come. Come closer. Come over here. Come to me. Come. See the place where the Lord lay. Don't be frozen on the spot. Come and see. And they were to see. That's what they were to do. They were to have a good look round. They were to take in everything that they could see. It was to register in their minds and in their hearts. Come. See the place where the Lord lay. And I hope we will respond to that invitation tonight, because the angel is offering it to us. He's inviting us, you and me, come, see the place where the Lord lay. Now I've got two questions. First question is this. What would you have seen had you been there? What would you have seen? I don't know how observant you are. I guess as a scientist, we kind of trained to be observant. But if you were observant, you would have seen exactly the same things as the ladies and disciples saw. That's what you would have seen. Now Matthew, in his account, doesn't really record for us what it is they saw. But if you go to the other three Gospels, Mark, Luke and John, they're full of seeing. They saw, they saw, they saw, they saw. So we need to think about it, what it is they saw. They saw 7 things. But then in the midst of all that, there was one thing they didn't see. Let's think about those things. 7 things they saw. First of them, they saw the stone rolled away. That's what they saw. Now the stone was enormous, maybe 5 foot in diameter. And it bothered them. As they were going to the tomb, the ladies, they were talking among themselves and said, well, how are we going to move that stone? It's pretty big. What are we going to do? Whether they knew the stone had been sealed after Friday, we're not sure. Whether they knew that there were soldiers guarding it, we're not sure. But still the stone represented a great obstacle to their objective, to what they wanted to do, to anoint the body, to pay their last respects. But when they arrive in the garden, Mark tells us, when they looked, they saw that the stone was rolled away. That's what they saw. Now this was really surprising. They kind of enter the garden, stone's gone, stone's aside. Now of course, that made their task a lot easier now. They didn't have to move the stone anymore. They didn't even have to convince the soldiers to grant them entrance or even to ask them to move the stone for them. They didn't need to do any of that. Listen, if you'd entered the garden with the ladies, that's what you would have seen. The stone rolled away. First thing. Second thing, they would have seen, and you would have seen if you'd been there, the inside of the tomb. The inside of the tomb. You see, Mark and Luke tell us that the ladies entered into the tomb. They went in. What was it like, the tomb? Well, Matthew and Mark tell us that it was hewn out of rock. It was like a rock face, and it was kind of cut out of the rock. That must have taken a big lot of effort. They didn't have dynamite in them days. But they kind of had to cut it. They cut this cave into the rock face. And that, of course, meant it was cool. Prevent the rapid decomposition of the bodies in that hot environment. It was dark. Without the stone rolled away, it was pitch black in there. It was new. Matthew tells us it was freshly cut. No one else had ever been buried there. This was a new grave, a new tomb. And all of that meant it was lonely It was desolate. There was no company for Jesus in the tomb. Listen, if you had been there, you would have seen the inside of the tomb. And you would have shivered along with them. But then thirdly, if you'd been there, you would have seen the young man. You see, the ladies, they enter the tomb, and in the gloom of the tomb, it's kind of sunlight coming in from behind them, but in the gloom, their attention is immediately caught by something. In fact, by someone who's described in Mark as a young man, and he's sat on the right-hand side. Now, this young man is clothed in a long white robe. Now, I don't know about you, but if you went into a dark place like that and you became aware that there was somebody there, you'd kind of have a bit of a jump. But somebody in a long white robe, that's kind of a bit more scary. And they probably were rather scared by it. But then it kind of dawned on them that he's kind of otherworldly. He's an angel. Maybe he's the same like the angel they've met outside. Luke and John clearly refer to two angels. Maybe there was one outside and one inside, and then later they were both inside. We're not sure. But Matthew's description of the angel outside is simply frightening. What does he say? The angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance, that means his face, his countenance was like lightning, and his raiment, his clothes, white as snow. Now that's pretty amazing, isn't it? What an amazing description. Listen, if you'd been there, if you'd gone to the garden with the ladies, you would have seen an angel, a young man on the right-hand side inside the tomb, dressed in white. But you know, the ladies, they were there specifically to see one thing. They went there to see one thing: the body of Jesus. And that was the one thing they didn't see. Yes, they saw the place where Jesus lay, but he wasn't laying there anymore. Luke tells us in his account, he says they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. They didn't find it. And it's almost as if, well, they see the angel and the angel speaks to them, but while the angel is speaking to them, their eyes are kind of glancing around the place thinking, well, where is he? They're kind of scanning. He's not here. Where is he? And listen, if you'd entered into the tomb with the ladies, there's one thing you would not have found: the body of Jesus. You wouldn't have found it. You could look under every nook and cranny, in every nook and cranny. You would never have found the body of Jesus of Nazareth. But there was something else. Something that the ladies themselves didn't seem to notice. It's funny, isn't it, how some people notice one thing, some people notice something else. And you can speak to two people who've seen the same thing. One of them doesn't see the details that you see, and you don't see the details that they see. That's just how it is. But what is it the ladies don't seem to refer to? Well, it's this: the linen burial shroud. You see, when Peter and John arrive, there's something that immediately catches their eye. It wasn't the angel. What was it that catches their eye? Well, it was the burial clothes. So we see specifically, it says about Peter in Luke's Gospel. It tells us there, then arose Peter and ran to the sepulchre, and stooping down, he beheld the linen clothes. That's what he saw. John tells us exactly the same thing about Peter. Then cometh Simon Peter, following him, and went into the sepulchre, and seeth the linen clothes. And it also says the same thing about John. He, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes. That's it. They saw the burial clothes. Now, what was remarkable about seeing the burial clothes? What was it that was so attention-grabbing about them? Well, these were the clothes that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus had used to bind up the body of the crucified Jesus, and working into that the 100 pounds of spice and ointment that they brought along. It's extremely expensive and extremely heavy, 100 pounds. And what that meant, of course, is that when you entered into the tomb, there was this amazing sweet scent that filled the atmosphere of the tomb. But what was it about the clothes that caught their attention? Well, in each of those three places, it uses the word lying. They saw the linen clothes lying. It was something to do with the way the linen clothes were. They weren't shredded. They weren't strewn around the floor, like some teenager who can't tidy up their bedroom. It wasn't like that. The tomb hadn't been raided. No, they were lying. They were spread out. They were there on the shelf, the stone shelf, just where Jesus had been laid. But there was no body inside them anymore. You could still see where the feet of Jesus had been, at the narrow end. You could still see where the shoulders of Jesus had been at the broad end. But there was no feet and no shoulders there anymore. It wasn't that somebody had unwrapped this thing. They were still there, as was. The grave clothes had simply collapsed, and they were flat in the kind of shape of a body. It was like a balloon without air. The body, Jesus' body, must have come out through the grave clothes. Listen, if you'd entered into the tomb, you would have seen the linen clothes just lying there, undisturbed, on the stone shelf. That's the fifth thing. Next, you would have seen the head napkin. Now again, Peter is the one who notices this. John tells us that in his account. It says, then cometh Simon Peter, following him, and went into the sepulchre, and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. Peter sees that. Now the napkin was a separate piece of cloth that was used to bind the head of Jesus. And John is very specific about what Peter sees. The napkin is unique, it's different to the rest of the burial clothes. While they had collapsed, the napkin seems to have been unwrapped and folded up separately, kind of over there, as opposed to over there. And if you'd entered into the tomb with Peter and John, you would have seen the napkin that was about Jesus' head folded up over there. Next, you would have seen two angels. Now, Mary Magdalene she goes back to tell the disciples that the body isn't there. They run to the tomb. She comes behind them and eventually arrives at the tomb for a second time. And she is inconsolable. And with the tears streaming down her cheeks, she enters into the tomb. And she sees two angels. One at the head end, one at the foot end, where Jesus had been laid on the shelf. She is shaken. She is visibly distraught. And the angels, in great tenderness, they try to console her. They try to comfort, to speak words of comfort. To tell her, woman, why are you weeping? But she's having none of that. She's having none of that consolation. She says, they've taken away my Lord. That's the final indignity that they've paid him. Taken him away. Listen, she's a woman who wants Jesus. She wants him. She wants him so much that she's willing to turn her back on two angels to get him. And if you'd entered into the tomb with Mary Magdalene, you would have seen two angels, one at the head and one at the foot. But lastly, if you joined Mary Magdalene, you would have seen the gardener. Because she turns away from the angels and she's confronted by the gardener, as she thinks. And she just blurts out to him, well, he speaks to her first. He said, well, why are you weeping? Same question. Why are you weeping? They've taken away my Lord, and if you've taken him away, you tell me where you've taken him, and I'll take him, and I'll pay the final respects to him properly. Mary. His words are so simple, so personal, so gracious. And the penny drops. It's like the scales fall from her eyes. He says, Jesus, Rabboni, Master, Teacher. This is Jesus. Jesus, at the foot of whose cross she had stood. Jesus, whose last words she had heard as he yielded up his spirit to his Father. Jesus, whose blood she had seen gush from his side onto the ground. Jesus, whose lifeless body she had seen taken down from the cross. Jesus, whose cortege she had followed to the tomb. Jesus, whose remains were encased behind that huge stone. Jesus, he is Jesus, her Lord and Master. And she's in no doubt. She goes back and says, I have seen the Lord. I've seen him. Listen, if you'd hung around in the garden with Mary Magdalene, you would have seen the Lord. And he would have greeted you by name. He would have greeted you by name. He's that sort of Lord. So, what would you have seen? Well, you'd have seen all of those things, the same that they saw. But now we need another question. How would you have reacted to what you saw? How would you have reacted? Now listen, if you'd seen what they saw, I suspect you would have reacted as they reacted. And when it comes to the impact of what they saw, the gospel writers don't leave us guessing as to the effect it had on them. Because it truly did have an amazing effect on them. What effects did it have? We'll list these briefly. Firstly, they feared and rejoiced. They feared and rejoiced. It was like being overcome with mixed emotions. It was like that there was some internal conflict going on in their hearts about which was going to come out on top, fear or rejoicing. These were kind of almost opposite reactions, but they were both expressed at the same time. Fear and great joy, Matthew calls it. Mark calls it trembling and amazed. That's it. Listen, if you'd seen the young man sat there at the right-hand side when you entered into the tomb, you would probably have been frightened out of your wits. But it wasn't just the angels that induced this response. It was the whole thing. It was the resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus. Tell me, what does the resurrection of Jesus do for you? How do you respond to the resurrection of Jesus? Have you ever trembled and been amazed at the resurrection of Jesus? It was truly astonishing and exhilarating. It overturns the order of all things. Jesus risen from the dead. And it thrills the follower of Jesus to his very core. Jesus, my Lord, has risen from the dead. Next, they remembered. You see, Luke tells us that the words of those two shining ones that they saw, he is not here, but is risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words. Oh yeah. He did tell us that, didn't he? Why didn't we think about that before? He told us he would be delivered. He told us he would be tortured. He told us he would be crucified. He told us the third day he would rise from the dead. We tried to block it out. We didn't really like that bit of his teaching, so we kind of blocked it. It was like cancel culture before its time. We cancelled that bit. But now, it all came flooding back. All those words of Jesus. Yes, Jesus was right. Oh yeah, Jesus is right. Listen, my friend, if you'd seen what they'd seen, the resurrection of Jesus would underline to you the truth of all of the words of Jesus. They were all right. When he said, come unto me, all ye that weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest, he was right. When he said, no one comes to the Father except by me, he was right. His words are completely truthful and utterly reliable. And the resurrection should make us remember that. We can trust Jesus implicitly. He rose from the dead, as he said. Next, wonder. Luke tells us about Peter that he went, he saw the clothes, and he departed wondering in himself at that which was come to pass. Wondering. Just put yourself in Peter's position. Peter had failed so badly. Peter was deeply ashamed of what he'd done. There seemed no way back. Jesus was dead. But now, it's almost as if the light bulb is coming on. Oh, maybe I can get to say sorry after all. Maybe I can get to put it right. Wondering. And listen, my friends, maybe there's something in your life and you feel you've failed your Lord. You've let him down. You've said something stupid or something wicked. And the world around you says, you call yourself a Christian? And it cuts deep. And you feel ashamed. Listen, Jesus has risen from the dead. And that means you can go to him and say sorry. You can go to him and confess your folly, and he will receive you. Next, they believed. Now, in a rare autobiographical comment, John speaks about himself. He says, he stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes lying, yet he went not in. And then he says, then went in that other disciple, which came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. He saw and believed. Now, it's clear from what he says that he hasn't quite got everything yet. It's not all completely straight in his mind. He hasn't quite understood how the resurrection of Jesus fitted in with the Old Testament, but he believed. He believed that Jesus was risen from the dead. He believed that Jesus always was and still is the Christ, the Son of God. Let me ask you a question. Have you believed what John believed? That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? You say, well, hold on a minute. I haven't seen the evidence. I haven't seen the resurrection with my own two eyes. You haven't got any need to. You don't need to, my friend. Hear the words of Jesus to Thomas later on. He says, Thomas, because you have seen, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Listen, that's why John penned this. So that you could know the facts and you could believe. And tonight, Jesus Christ calls you to believe. He calls you to trust him. He calls you to stake everything on him. And when you do so, he promises to bless you beyond your wildest imaginations. Blessed are those, he says. Blessed are those that have not seen and yet have believed. Believed. Then obeyed. You see, the angel makes this invitation, come and see. But the invitation is backed up with an instruction. And the instruction is Matthew 28 verse 7. Go quickly and tell. Go and tell. Come and see, go and tell. Those two things go together. Now listen, if you'd seen that Jesus was risen from the dead, you mustn't keep it to yourself. Go and tell. Go and tell. That's what the angel called them to do. And that's what the angel calls you to do. And in fact, this instruction is backed up by Jesus. In verse 10, when he meets the women, he says, go and tell my brethren. And it's backed up again in the last words that Jesus gives his disciples. Go ye therefore into all nations and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Go and tell. And it's really instructive that it's in their going and telling that Jesus meets them. It's in that obedience that Jesus meets them. And if we want the closeness of Jesus, we can expect to find it as we obey him in going and telling. Lastly, they worshipped. They worshipped. When they saw him, they fell at his feet. They clasped his feet. And they worshipped. They worshipped. Adoration was exaltation, relief, wonder. Let me ask you, is your soul aching for Jesus? Maybe there's people around you that are trying to fob you off with something less than Jesus. They're trying to fob you off with church, or they're trying to fob you off with doctrine. Don't be fobbed off, my friend. Don't be fobbed off. If it's Jesus your soul is seeking, you seek him. And you carry on seeking him until you've found him. And then, like Jacob of old, you'll be saying, I will not let you go until you bless me. Is that you? You seeking Jesus? Even as a believer, you want closeness with Jesus. My friend, that's a great thing to want. You keep seeking. You keep looking for him. And don't give up until you found him. Well, here we have it. The things they saw and the reactions that they had. And may these things fill us with joy on this Easter Sunday.